it sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Willi.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Don't you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
Excited to celebrate. We went to a brewery. I had 2 or 3 beers, and I have like a heart condition. It's complicated. I won't get into it, but basically it means I have a very, very low tolerance for alcohol. So it was already beer 3, and I was completely smashed. And then we saw the most beautiful blue glowing light across the street, which was Donda, a Vietnamese restaurant right off of Colfax. If you are a listener and you want to meet me, there's a chance that you're going to, because I'll be there. We just were like, you know what?
Let's give it a shot.
The night's young. Let's give it a shot. And we go in there and we order the coconut chicken curry,
clay pot. There we go. That's what it was.
And it was the most exquisite curry I've ever had in my life. Normally when you get curry that has potatoes in it, right? You cut through the potato and it tastes like uncooked, or it tastes like cooked potato on the inside. It tasted like curry on the inside. If that gives you an idea of how long it was soaking in the clay pot to like fully absorb all of the flavors and juices.
Oh, yeah.
Daniel and I didn't talk about anything except how good the food was for 30 minutes.
It's true. And it was and the reason I say it's ruined me is that a day or two ago, a new like pho / Vietnamese place opened up pretty close to us. Mm-hmm. And we had heard, Kat had heard from like a coworker or something. They were like, it's pretty good. My wife said the pho was pretty good and all this kind of stuff. We're like, all right, we always say we want to do this. Let's try out the new spots close to us and let's see if it's any good.
Ain't it, Chief?
I go there. Kat and I both go there. She gets the pho. I get the yellow curry. And they had, by the way, I should say, a couple of like Thai dishes. They had like Penang curry, which I'm a sucker for a good Penang. But theirs was like, no, this is our yellow curry. It's cooked in coconut milk. And I was like, all right, this is like their curry. I'm going to give this one a shot. Dude, it was like a 3 out of 10 by comparison. I was like, I had like half of it and I was like, I'm not stuffed, but like, it's not good enough for me to be like, I want to be full.
Oh, yeah.
When we left Donda,
we gorged ourselves.
We were like, I can't
to the point
stop.
that I ended up coming home, and that's the end of the story there. We also decided that it was a good idea after 3 beers for us to go and split a bottle of soju halfway.
Yep.
Which was really the final nail in the coffin. And by the time we got home, Daniel was sitting on the couch. No TV on, by the way, which is mad disrespectful.
No, we had TV on. Remember, you were like, "Here, turn something on." And I was like, "Oh, okay, here we go." And I put something on.
Well, maybe it wasn't loud enough, but
or you were very loud.
I blew chunks in that bathroom at night. It's the only food. Normally everybody can think of a time where there was a food that you ate when you were a kid and then you threw it up and now you can never eat it again.
Yeah.
I refuse to feel that way about Donda because it was my fault.
It wasn't them.
I was the one who overate. I was the one who overdrank, and I'm going to go back there and I'm going to get that curry again because it was so incredibly good.
And it treated me just fine. So it was not even an issue.
I went out there and I was like, "So what did you hear?" And you were like, literally everything.
I was like, you doing okay there, buddy? And you were like, what'd you hear? And I was like, come on, man. How could I not hear you? Yeah. I was concerned. I was like,
done
oh, no.
that since like I was like 21.
Yeah.
That's funny. But it was so good. Such good food. So if you're in Denver, if you're anywhere in Colorado, you should go to Donda, which is right next to Bon and Butter, which is also an incredible like banh mi shop that they have in the mornings. It's a family company. They own both. And yeah,
really,
it's
really,
officially
really delicious.
an official sponsor of the Biographers podcast as of today.
Not actually at all. We just wanted to give them a shout out because they were so delicious.
Just a shout out.
All right. Well, you ready to get going here?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, before we get going here, wanted to give a quick little shout out, like we always try to do with any of our Patreon subscribers. We had somebody join our little horde of people that support us, and that is Naomi Falk. So Naomi, really appreciate you. And she also sent us a really lovely little note on Patreon that was, she said she finished up Fran's list and was like, love it, love your approach, can't wait for more, kind of a thing. So yeah, just wanted to say thank you. Your support means a lot
Thank
to
you so
us.
much, Naomi.
Yeah, and wanted to give you a little shout out there. And for anybody else that is listening, if you do feel like you want to be generous, just like Naomi, you can also do that on our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers. We're getting more and more folks signed up for it, which is just incredibly generous and kind and amazing to see. So thank you, all of our supporters. All right, buddy. Well, you ready to get going into Pancho Villa Part 2?
Dude, let's do it. I'm excited.
This is going to be a good one. I will say I finished episode 3, working on episode 4. I'm excited to get through this one almost just so that we can get to episode 3, because episode 3 is like, it is my favorite. It's really, really cool. Like there's just so much neat stuff that kind of happens. So anyways, let's get going here into part 2. Now, last time we saw the earliest parts of Pancho Villa's life, including his transition from a humble farm worker to a full-blown bandit after shooting his boss in the leg, who was trying to rape his sister. We also learned about the rising cries for revolution amongst the people of Mexico, who were suffering at the hands of the dictator Porfirio Diaz, who had implemented laws and policies that greatly boosted the fiscal prosperity of Mexico, but at the expense of the people's welfare. Now, throughout his late teen years and into his early 20s, Pancho had bounced back and forth from the life of a bandit and working legitimate legal jobs, but always found himself in a quandary. Legal work was good for his soul, but the pay was bad, while work as a bandit and outlaw paid very well, but was bad for his soul. He was never truly without a heart for his own people, however, as whenever he did manage to come upon a tidy sum of money, he was well known for giving money back to the poor and needy, at least when the mood struck him. But where we left off last time, the call for revolution had been heard after Porfirio Diaz rigged an election to maintain power, an election he had previously stated he wouldn't even participate in. The leading voice of the revolution came from a man named Francisco Madero, the person who ran against Porfirio Diaz, only to be thrown in jail by Porfirio just days before the election. After escaping his jail cell and fleeing to El Paso, Texas, Madero issued an ultimatum to Porfirio Diaz, stating that he either step down from office by November 20th, 1910, or face revolution.
Ooh.
I know. Now, not long before this, Pancho was approached by a leader of Madero's political party named Abraham Gonzalez, and that is a name to just kind of remember as we move forward, because he was kind of Pancho's mentor when it came to being like, hey, I know you're like a bandit and everything, but like, have you thought about the people of Mexico? And he really like got into Pancho's head and really became kind of this like buddy of his, more or less, and again, kind of mentor. Okay, so that's Abraham Gonzalez. So again, he was approached by Abraham and was asked to join the guerrilla army. Pancho wasn't exactly gung-ho on overthrowing the Mexican government, but was promised that in doing so, all of Porfirio's cronies that had been making his life hell would also be done away with should they succeed. And Pancho really liked that idea. And pretty much just like that, Pancho retired as a bandit and became a revolutionary. Upon joining, he was made the second-in-command leader of a 28-member group of freedom fighters. Ironically, just like Porfirio Diaz had done previously by making former bandits into his thuggish rurales, Pancho's group was also primarily made up of former cattle rustlers.
So they're just fighting criminals with criminals, kind of.
I mean, in a time when criminals were rampant, I mean, I think, yeah, there was just this element of like
who isn't?
we need people to fight. The people that know how to fight are criminals. I guess let's grab them. Like, that was sort of the atmosphere, you know? Now, by all accounts, Pancho was not the ideal candidate for a leader in Madero's revolutionary army, and his reputation for brutality was well known. Madero knew this and was trying really hard to keep his revolution dignified, always maintaining that it was in accordance with the law. So he wanted to keep bandits, especially people like Pancho, out of his armies. But he also had limited resources in terms of people who knew how to fight. In Pancho's case, his skills as a bandit were just too incredible to argue, and his natural charisma automatically placed him into a leadership role. Now, just like the American Revolution before it, the Mexican Revolution did not suddenly ignite into massive battles and skirmishes. Hell, the Boston Tea Party happened in 1773, and the Declaration of Independence wasn't even written until 1776. For Mexico, things would be kind of similar, but they would actually happen a little bit faster. When November 20th, 1910 came and went, the date Madero had set for Porfirio Diaz to step down, not much happened, apart from a few small skirmishes, and there was no mass uprising from the people. But on November 21st, moves would be made. Pancho and his group decided to take the city of San Andres, which they believed to be the stronghold of a garrison of federal troops. Upon entering the city, they discovered the federal troops were gone and took the city without firing a single bullet. But soon, they caught wind that a train full of federal troops were about to make a stop in San Andres.
Oh, so like almost like a Trojan horse thing where they were expecting them to be there, but they weren't there. So then was it like a bad information situation?
I mean, I think it was just one of those where they were like, you could call it that, I guess, right? Where they knew that San Andres was occupied by federal troops and that it was controlled by the government. So they figured, we'll go there and we'll take out the federal troops and then we'll have the city of San Andres. And they got there and were like, oh, they're gone. And then they quickly found out, they were like, oh, but their troops are coming. Like, there's a train that's on its way here. So like
to them.
Exactly.
So they're going to be able to like hunker down and like prepare.
Yes. And the federal troops, so it wasn't like a Trojan horse or even a trap. It was like the federal troops didn't know. They were just like, la-di-da-di-da, like on a train coming their way. Like, oh yeah, we're going to go into San Andres and this will be our place where we're going to be for a while. They had no idea that Pancho and his men were there.
Schedule. Gotcha.
Exactly. Right. So when they heard this, Pancho had all of his men take cover, remaining silent and out of sight. Unbeknownst to Pancho, it would be 30 of his men against some 170 federal troops. As the train creaked to a stop, Lieutenant Colonel Yepes of the 12th Battalion dusted himself off and stepped onto the platform. Pancho stepped out from behind a building, drew his pistol, and shot Yepes in the dead center of his forehead. A volley of shots erupted at the train. It was chaos, and none of the troops knew what to do, having no one there to command them or give orders. Within minutes, the train began to move again, trying to escape the onslaught. Pancho and his men managed to kill 7 federal troops and injure another 9. The first blood of federal troops had now been shed in the Mexican Revolution.
Wait, so Pancho was the first shot in the Mexican Revolution?
This is slightly debated. Okay. And I'll explain why. Okay,
that would be sick.
There is a lot of evidence to suggest that yes, he was. But essentially, what happened was he was in command of this group, so he was like, "Be silent, be silent." So they were waiting for him to attack. Okay, so he was undoubtedly the first person that shot. I would say that's fairly accurate. Now, we can't say that it was the first in the entire revolution because remember the day before there were some skirmishes that broke out.
Gotcha.
But nothing really happened. And to my knowledge, nobody had really died. It was like, oh, don't do this. And then they said, oh, you stop. And that was the end of it. It wasn't like really anything that happened. Now, this guy, Yepes, when he stepped out, he did get shot in the forehead. Okay. Now,
ice cold.
We can kind of debate like, oh, was it one of Pancho's troops? Was it not? But what I know about Pancho Villa is that he was a crack shot, right? Like dead eye. Okay. So I'd be surprised if it wasn't him and his bullet that actually did kill the first federal troop in the Mexican Revolution. So I think there is a high likelihood.
I want to believe that because that's sick.
It is very sick, right?
Yeah.
Now, this skirmish also gave Pancho an idea that would become a key tactic for him moving forward. Rather than fight his enemy head on, he would use the element of surprise.
Guerrilla warfare.
Yeah. Now, the story of Pancho's deeds were beginning to spread around the area, and citizens who were once apprehensive about the revolution were beginning to take up arms and join the cause. Pancho's charisma as a leader was undeniable. People wanted to follow him. He even managed to keep all of his troops relatively under control, preventing them from looting or stealing after their victory. So the townsfolk saw him as a hero, though this idea is debated by historians, and we know for a fact that in the future, Pancho's occupation in some cities would be nothing short of brutal. But I tend to find that in those situations, if he ever treated a town brutally, it was a town that he attacked, not a town that he occupied. Okay.
Gotcha.
And there's kind of the key difference. So in San Andres, when he got there, he was like, we're not here to attack the town. The town is not they're not against us. Right.
Yeah.
So he kept the troops in line, but we'll kind of see in the future if he approached a town that had federals there and was like, surrender, and they said no, look out a lot of times.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to make sure that is clear. It wasn't like a lot of times I'll read from these people that are kind of Pancho Villa experts. They'll be like, oh, and that was one of the best things about him is that he kept his troops in line and they never did anything to the townspeople. And it's like, that's just not true. He did. It just depends on the circumstances.
The context. Yeah.
And honestly, it was one of those where it's like, it depends on the mood. I mean, there were certain times that Pancho was like, nah, you're against us, so we're going to do all this terrible stuff to you. And there are times he was like, no, keep it in line. This is not how we do things. So it was very, very weird.
There seems to be sort of a duality with Pancho a lot of the time. Like he's almost like a two-faced character.
He is, 100%.
Like, just there's a side of him that imagines himself as like this very Napoleonic, brave, I don't know, esteemed gentleman who's in a poor circumstance. And then there's the other part of him that is actually kind of a wild man, which I feel like we see a lot with organized crime. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, you think about like the made men here in the US or whatnot. They're always portrayed as somewhat like gentleman criminals.
Yes.
Right. They're not like violent because that's how they see themselves. But there's also obviously that side where, like, you know, Al Capone would invite people over and then just break them all apart with a baseball bat. Yeah. And that's like a complete wild man tactic.
Absolutely.
You know? So,
and I think the comparison to Napoleon is perfect. And that's actually been drawn many times where people, not only in terms of like his military tactics, he did a lot of things unconventionally, just like Napoleon did. But Napoleon is also one of those very polarizing figures where people will look at it and go like, undoubtedly you're fascinating, but we can't say that you were just a good guy. Right. So yeah. I think that's a pretty apt comparison. Now, regardless, within a few weeks, his group increased from some 30 men to over 325. And by December, he was commanding over 500, which was 33% of the entire Revolutionary Army in Chihuahua. He was known to run a tight ship and had a zero tolerance policy for treason or cowardice. If he discovered one of his soldiers had been speaking to the Federales or deserted the revolution, he would personally and unceremoniously execute them with a gunshot to the head.
Yep.
Now, not long after this, in early December, they decided that an attack on the capital of Chihuahua, Ciudad Chihuahua, was their next move. Pancho assembled a group of some 40 men for a reconnaissance mission on the capital, and soon spotted a battalion of 700 federal troops. Feeling cocky, Pancho decided to attack. Before they knew it, they were in a full-blown firefight with the Federales, exchanging shots for some 90 minutes. Though Pancho's men were great marksmen, taking out dozens of Federals, they were simply no match for their numbers. The Federal troops pushed them back into a small trench-like gorge, and they were fighting for their lives. Retreat was imminent, but they needed time to escape. So thinking quickly, Pancho ordered his men to take off their sombreros and line them up along the top of the trench. Like something out of a Looney Tunes cartoon, the Federal troops were fooled, believing the sombreros were Pancho and his men digging in, ready to fight to the last men.
That's really funny.
It bought them enough time to escape, though Pancho would take a shot to the leg, but he would later say, quote, "The idiots wasted a ton of bullets." In the end, about 15 revolutionaries were killed, but nearly 100 federales were too.
That's insane.
Isn't that insane?
The numbers are crazy too, because like if you know anything about war history, you know that retreats are generally the bloodiest part of combat.
Yep.
It's not actually the active fighting. It's when you say we can't fight anymore, we have to get out of here. That's when the massacre happens.
Yeah.
So the fact that he managed to pull his troops out with such an incredible numbers, numbers odd against him.
Oh yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah. And I just love that image of him being like, take off your hats, put them along the trench. And all the Federals were like, oh man, they're sticking around. And so they were literally shooting at their hats.
I don't know. That's so funny because it's just like, they're standing still. I don't know.
But if you're at a little bit of a distance, you can kind of see it in the chaos and the smoke and the dust and all this kind of stuff. You're like, oh, there they are. And you're like trying to shoot for them. Pancho is also, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as we move forward, he was also known to, generally speaking, there were circumstances where he did, but generally he didn't do ranks. Okay. So he wasn't like, all of you line up over here. We're going to fight Civil War style. It was like, you're over here, you're over here, you're over here. And there was like peppering of different people or whatever.
Yeah.
So they were all along. So you can kind of imagine if you look at this sort of trench-like gorge, even if it's like 50 yards long, and there are these sort of hats all kind of peppered miscellaneously all over the place.
Okay.
You're like, okay, it kind of looks like they're all over the place, you know? So just kind of awesome. That was one of like my favorite.
Just a very
funny
like
little
Looney
stories.
Tunes where they shoot the hat, but not the person wearing it, sort of thing.
Or like the gag where like Bugs Bunny will like hold the hat up on a stick, right? And then Elmer Fudd will be like, "Oh, there's the wabbit," and shoot at it, and then it's like, stupid.
Well, I know we did that in World War
happened.
II. There was like an entire inflatable army at some point in order to like convince, I think, like German troops that we were in a specific location just long enough that we could like move to another one. So it's a common practice, but it just considering the numbers difference between him and the the Federales is nuts.
And you also have to think about the fact that Pancho had zero military training, zero military tactic knowledge, and was just like, take off your, like, it was just this random thought. And like, in episode 1, I said very specifically that Pancho was known for his creativity and his imagination.
Yeah.
That's where this kind of stuff comes into play. He just had this weird vision for like, on the fly, he was good at improv. Like a thing could happen and pop into his head, be like, do this. And it would weirdly work a lot of times. It was just crazy cool.
That's cool. That's cool, man.
So now that the revolution had begun, Francisco Madero started to feel the pressure of returning to Mexico because remember, he was hiding out in El Paso, Texas. Understandably, not a lot of people were willing to put their life on the line for a leader who was hiding out in a different country. So in February of 1911, Madero decided to return to Mexico, going through Chihuahua and using that as his home base. His new goal was to take the border city of Ciudad Juarez, which was separated from El Paso and therefore the United States by only the Rio Grande River, or Rio Bravo if you're in Mexico, which I learned that too. If you're in Mexico, they call it the Rio Bravo, but the United States calls it they say the Rio Grande, but it's spelled Grande, so I feel like it should be called Rio Grande, but anyway.
I thought it was Rio Grande.
Yeah. I think it's one of those weird things where it's like, white people call themselves gringo, but Mexican people don't call white people gringo.
Yeah,
they usually call them gabacho. So I think it's one of those. But yeah, it's a lot of people say Rio Grande. I think it should be pronounced Rio Grande, but is what it is. Now, the city, Ciudad Juarez, was a strategic key, as it would be the perfect place to smuggle goods into the country for the revolution and also offer a quick getaway plan in case things went south. But this is the U.S. industry pro or anti revolution currently? I'm pretty sure they're anti, right? Currently anti, because I think it's Taft who's in power right now. I think we'll talk about that in a little bit. He liked that the dictator was in power because the economy of Mexico was beneficial for basically more or less the Industrial Revolution inside of the United States.
Gotcha.
So they generally didn't want to have that, but that, just like we've kind of learned with a lot of other war stuff, right, is that didn't mean that they couldn't still smuggle stuff and buy things from private arms dealers in the United States.
Gotcha.
So
okay, that's what I was curious about.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily the government that was supplying them guns, but they could smuggle them across from the United States into Mexico.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a huge history of countries feeding both sides of a war. I mean,
absolutely.
That happens a lot.
Absolutely. But this was going to be tricky, again, taking the city of Juarez, because the ragtag group of revolutionary fighters had never taken the federal army head on in a battle, only in small surprise attacks. So to test their mettle, Madero decided to first stage a smaller attack on the town of Casagrandes, but it was a dismal failure. Porfirio Diaz assumed that this would slash morale across the country, but it had the opposite effect. The people of Mexico really respected Madero's moxie, and the Revolutionary Army began to grow even larger. By the end of February 1911, so many small battles had broken out across the country that the Federal Army started to panic, like a wolf being attacked by fleas. Porfirio Diaz tried to strengthen his army by enacting a kind of military draft, but most of the time, if a commoner received a draft order, they basically said screw that and joined up with the revolution. Even the wealthy hacienda owners saw the writing on the wall. Many started supplying food and water to the revolutionary armies. They figured if they didn't and the revolutionaries won, they'd be the first to be swinging from trees.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, right? If any hacienda owner remained loyal to Porfirio, they became targets for Pancho and his men to steal their cattle and supplies. And around this point, Pancho went on an absolute tear. He blew up bridges and train tracks, cut down telephone lines, robbed federal supply wagons, anything he could do to slow the Federales down. He figured if Diaz couldn't communicate with his forces, move them around effectively, or supply them with food and ammunition, everything would start to break down, and it was working. Everywhere Pancho went, he recruited new members to the cause of revolution and collected new scars in battle. He would almost always send a letter to a town demanding they surrender, and if they did not, he would attack. If Pancho won the offensive, his treatment of the town would be brutal. In one instance, after taking a town, Pancho executed the town's judge and court secretary, despite their pleas for mercy. If he did manage to take prisoners, his personal signature soon became cutting an ear off of anyone that stood against the revolution.
Damn.
Yeah. And so he had a nickname that was sort of unofficial by other people that didn't like him as the ear cutter. Kind of awesome, to be honest with you.
It's a very medieval,
bad.
like...
Right.
Like Sir Clegane, the ear cutter.
Exactly. You know? The toe cutter, I think, is from Mad Max, is one of the other ones.
Yeah.
But anyways, I just like, wow, the ear cutter, that's pretty brutal, but also awesome. I hate to say.
Well, it's also like, I was thinking about the hacienda guys, and it just kind of reminds me of like, sometimes like companies now, whenever like some new social movement happens, they just end up like plastering whatever that is all across their storefronts in order to like be like, we're on your side. Yeah. Just for like convenience sake.
Yeah.
That's a pretty universal thing throughout all of history.
Totally. Now, we did talk about this in the last episode here, but I will also add in that he and his troops were also said to rape women in the towns that they took. Now, again, I don't want to get into it. We spent literally 10 minutes in the last episode talking all about this and the possibilities of it and everything like that. There is debate historically on how accurate it is, but it seems to be that the general consensus is like, yeah, it happened. It wasn't necessarily like a serial situation, but it was like it did happen. It was war, and it seemed to be the de facto standard by pretty much everyone. Federal troops, Pancho, Emiliano Zapata, who we haven't really talked about a ton, but we will a little bit. So it wasn't necessarily...
So he was pretty brutal to most of these towns.
If he won, he could be, right?
Gotcha.
It's weird. It just sort of depended.
It was dependent on like how compliant they were.
How compliant, and honestly, it sounds weird to say, but like kind of just his mood. Like there were certain times that he was just feeling ruthless and was like, yep, we're going to ransack this town and do terrible things. And then other times he'd be like, hey, if I catch anybody looting, I'm going to kill you. Like it was weird. It just sort of depended. I think it was like his vibe that he got from where he went. It wasn't necessarily every time, but it wasn't never. It was just like, I feel like when the mood struck him, he was kind of like a psycho in that way. So
gotcha.
Yeah. But regardless, he was relentless and ruthless. His notoriety shifted so drastically from bandit to brutal revolutionary that the federal government issued a bounty for his head, stating they wanted him dead or alive.
Bum, bum, bum. Classic. I imagine the wanted posters.
Oh, yeah. Of course. It'd be sweet to see a wanted poster of Pancho.
Yeah.
Now, by March, Pancho earned such a reputation that Francisco Madero himself asked to meet him. Pancho seemed to have made a good impression, as shortly after, his group joined the official ranks of Madero and his men. He was made a general in the Revolutionary Army, and Pancho was now in command of some 700 soldiers. With a larger revolutionary force now officially assembled, plans soon started forming to finally take the pivotal city of Ciudad Juarez. On April 7th, 1911, the Revolutionary Army began to march on Juarez, with Pancho at the very front, leading some 500 men, alongside another very important member of the revolution that we will talk about a little bit more later, named Pascual Orozco, who is leading another group of 500. Madero tailed the 2 battalions, leading another 1,500 troops as backup, so 2,500 revolutionary troops in total. By comparison, the federal troops stationed at Juarez numbered just 700.
Damn.
Big disparity.
Oh, yeah. It's also just the timing is so interesting from an American perspective. When we think of like revolutionary stuff, we think like Enlightenment period. And the fact that this was happening in like 1911.
Oh, yeah.
This was happening when like Tesla was like figuring out a lot of his most important like final discoveries. Like the electric dam was installed in I think 1907 in Buffalo, New York. Like AC power is finally getting its thing. Like industry was kicking off. Swing dancing was going to be popular here soon, or flapper dancing, I should say. Like it's so weird to think that there's like an actual like revolution. If you just replaced the pistols for muskets and the trains for horses, this just feels like an American Revolution story.
Well, and that's kind of the interesting thing, right? Is that this is at the time where cars were commonplace at this point, right? They weren't necessarily the Model T. I don't think that was quite yet, but it's not far off. But
like wealthy people did own.
There were, cars were all over the place in the United States. There were not nearly as many in Mexico. There were plenty in Mexico, but still the kind of normal transportation in Mexico was horses. Also keep in mind, this was only a couple years prior to World War I starting, and the revolution in Mexico coincided with World War I. So I want to say it was 1914 when World War I officially kicked off, maybe even a little bit earlier. I have to double check on that one.
I think this like gives some perspective also as an American, where I think a lot of Americans can be very judgmental of countries with civil unrest, but we're also not aware that our biggest and greatest civil unrests were 200 years in the past, 300 years in the past. And some other people, like 1911, there's a chance that like right now there's people whose parents were revolutionaries. You know, older folks in Mexico whose parents were revolutionaries, whose parents could have been amputees fighting for Pancho Villa. You know, like I don't know.
I would also say it's I would personally, if I was able to wave a magic wand and change the label of anything in history, I would personally say America did not have a revolutionary war. They had a war of independence. That's what it was, okay? They were fighting for independence against the English to form their own government. Mexico did that too in like 1808 or whatever, maybe 1816 is, I have to double check on the date from the last episode. So it was not long at all after America fought for their independence that Mexico fought for their independence off of the Spanish. They said, we want to be free from the Spanish. And then 100 years later, they had a revolutionary war. Right.
That's a good point. That's actually a really important point.
Yes.
There's some contrast there because it's not just a foreign entity versus, you know, a local government. It's the people versus their own local government, which can be way messier.
Correct. Which is, I think it's an important distinction because I don't really think America did that. We didn't fight against, we did that in the Civil War, but that was, you know, secession that we were fighting against, right? So again, I would say personally, I have started to see the American Revolution as more of the American War of Independence rather than the American Revolution, because I think that's a more appropriate way to say it. You know?
Yeah. No, that's fair.
So anyways, again, it's not like Mexico was behind the times. It was like they did that. And then unlike America, where I think there's even criticism to make on that, where we kind of created this government that it seemed like most people were into, right? Mexico had this really tumultuous 100-year period where they couldn't quite figure it out. They created constitutions, they had certain leaders, but then certain times it allowed for dictators to come into place, and then the people got abused, and then it called for revolution. So it was like these little movements and increments over this 100-year period.
And I think we can be really judgmental of countries and places that are still going through that turmoil and be like, wow, that's so terrible, this and that. And it's like, well, we're also might not, from your perspective, we haven't experienced that to the same extent, except for, the Civil War. And if we did, it was so far in the past in our own like cultural collective consciousness versus 1911, the Battle of the City of Juarez?
1911, April in 1911.
Yeah, that is way closer historically to a major battle than I think we're giving them credit for.
Oh, yeah. And to be clear, I should also say, I don't really emphasize this a whole lot in the writing, but as the Mexican Revolution was all going forward, it was major news headlines. Like all over the U.S. People followed it like a drama, right? So we have a lot of different, newspapers that were going to be reporting on the Mexican Revolution, and Pancho Villa would be in the headlines all the time. So just wanted to put that out there in case anybody was curious. This wasn't like a hidden away thing. This was big international news. So yeah. Anyhow. So again, we've got these 2,500 revolutionary troops. They're marching up to Juarez, and they're going to be against about 700 of the federales. Now, it was clear that the revolutionaries were going to dominate. And when word got back to Porfirio Diaz, he started to panic. He sent a messenger to Madero requesting peace talks, with the basics being that if the revolutionaries lay down their weapons, Porfirio would ban re-elections, he would give the land back to the common folk, and remove his cronies who held political power across the states. Madero actually thought this sounded pretty good, but Pancho and the other generals hated it. To them, the only path to victory was complete removal of Porfirio Diaz and an overhaul of the government. For a month... what's up?
I was just saying, there's no guarantee that he's going to stick to his word, because he said he wasn't going to. There's a lot of times in democracies where there's a party that wants to go by the books, and they're up against a party that does not care how the books are written. They just want to win. And the party that goes by the books gets duped. So I would have to say I'm on Team Pancho with this one.
I think you're mostly right here. It was, and I think that was their logic, is they were like, we don't trust this guy, so like, we got to get rid of
There's no
everything.
reason to trust that he's going to stick to his word. He didn't stick to his word with the election.
Exactly. So I think that was sort of the logic. But again, if you kind of think about it from Madero's perspective, he wanted as much peace as he could. He didn't want to see a bunch of people die by his command, and he really wanted to, again, in his mind, he was always trying to look at it as a legal thing, where...
and also from the bigger picture, right? There are still probably at some place Mexicans that are supporting Porfirio, and by having Porfirio basically back him, then that means that everybody is on, what is it, Madero's side?
Francisco Madero, yeah.
Like... If Porfirio is in support of him, then that's a full flush versus a revolution where maybe you have 55% support or 60% support. He could have 70 or 80% support because he's also taking on the people from the other side. Yeah,
and I would say by this point, only a very small percentage of the people of Mexico supported Porfirio Diaz. It was generally very wealthy people and landowners. But again, Madero was like, I don't want blood on my hands. I want to do this as legally as I can. Kind of like in America's Constitution, we say there's the right to a militia, right? And basically it is to take up arms against your government if you feel like they're oppressing you. So Madero kind of felt the same way. And then he was like, I don't want this to feel like it's just a revolt. I want it to feel like a legal revolution where we're overthrowing people that are violating the laws of Mexico. And he always wanted to get back to democracy. That was always Francisco Madero's ideal situation. So for him, this didn't seem that bad. He was like, okay, Porfirio goes away. You remove your cronies. You ban re-elections. That's kind of what I want, right? And everything else we can work out over time as a democratically
because
voted
that's
thing.
What Porfirio said it. Like he's not going to actually do it.
Right.
At least from my perspective.
Right. No, and I don't think you're wrong. So for a month, the army laid in wait as negotiations took place. But eventually, Pancho and the other generals decided it was time for action. In the immortal words of Tuco from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, quote, "When you have to shoot, shoot. Don't talk." Which, have you seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Caleb showed it to me.
Oh, it's fantastic. And there's a point where Tuco's taking a bath and this guy comes and gives him this whole speech about how he wants to kill him. And unbeknownst to the guy talking to Tuco has a gun in the bath with him and just pops him and then gets up out of the bath and goes, "When you have to shoot, shoot. Don't talk." It's fantastic.
That's a very Pancho way of thinking.
It really is, which is why I added it in. Now, the generals knew Madero wanted to avoid a fight, so they sent orders to their subordinate officers to just randomly start shooting at the Federales, while Pancho and the other generals snuck off to El Paso. Now, sure enough, the Revolutionary Army started shooting. The Federals started shooting back. By the time Pancho and the other generals got back to Madero hours later, they basically just said, well, I mean, the battle's already started and we're clearly winning, so we might as well just finish the job.
This reminds me a lot of what happened in like World War II Japan, where there was like a lot of younger officers who would just be like, I just felt it would be, it wouldn't be right to the emperor if I didn't go and attack these random Chinese citizens. Despite the fact that all of my officers told me not to do so, I just felt compelled for the people of Japan that we had to do this. And then, the Japanese government was like, well, we can't stop you.
Yeah, pretty much. And to that, a helpless Madero agreed. So Pancho and Orozco joined the battle, leading their troops into the city, blowing up houses with dynamite and killing as many Federales as they could. By May 10th, 1911, the border city of Ciudad Juarez was taken by the revolutionary forces. It was the first major battle won by the revolution, and with this victory under his belt, Madero demanded that Porfirio Diaz step down. He agreed, amazingly, but on the condition that the Federal Army be maintained and the Revolutionary Army be disbanded, lest Mexico fall into chaos. So with that, on May 21st, 1911, Porfirio Diaz signed what is now known as the Treaty of Ciudad Juarez. Porfirio's 30-year reign was over, and just 5 days later, on May 26th, he left Mexico forever, living in exile in Paris until his death in 1915, so just a couple years later.
He got to go to Paris after all that?
I know.
That's so shitty.
I know. So he probably was like, this isn't
fine,
that bad.
I'll leave.
I know.
It'll be terrible over there, I'm sure.
Oh, no. Too many brothels and dance halls and great food.
Yes. There's a tower. They'll probably put me up there. It's terrible. You don't want to go. You don't want to see it.
I mean, honestly. But it's the same thing with like Napoleon. After all the stuff that he did, we're like, we're going to banish you to a tropical island, right? Like, how bad could that be? But anyways. Now, though Madero hadn't been in favor of the battle initially, he had to admit that the sideways actions of his generals resulted in the best possible outcome. At least, so he thought. See, when Madero signed the Treaty of Ciudad Juarez, none of his generals knew about it, at least not the terms within it. In their minds, they had fought hard and figured they would continue to command armies after the revolution was won. Oh. But that wasn't the case, according to the treaty. Even worse, Madero promised to protect one of the federal generals named Juan Navarro. This particularly outraged Pancho, as in January of that year, Navarro and his men had executed a group of captured revolutionary soldiers, and Pancho wanted revenge. But Madero refused, allowing Navarro to flee to the United States. This resulted in Pancho and Orozco staging an uprising by gathering their troops outside of Madero's tent. But Madero played it cool and managed to sway the soldiers. He kind of like gave them this whole speech about like, this is not what we're about. This is not what we do. Like, you have to understand what's a give and take in this situation. Like, he really like spoke to the people. He didn't, he wasn't emotional.
He managed to walk his way out of Pancho Villa's rage.
And this other guy, Pascual Orozco, who was also very passionate, let's say, and a former bandit as well. So
my guess would just be to just hire them as federales, right?
I mean, okay, so, but it's complicated because, okay, yeah, let's say we do that, right? And now what's going to happen? The federal generals are just going to be like, yeah, sure, let's take in this bandit who killed hundreds of my men
True.
in as one of my own, and now everything's hunky-dory. Like, no. Like,
There's no way to, this is oil and water.
it's very complicated, right? Where it's not as easy as that, right? But anyhow, Madero was very, very courageous in this moment because he was basically standing in front of probably somewhere between 500 and 1,000 of the troops, right? His own revolutionaries who were like, yo, this isn't cool. Kept his head, swayed them all, including Pancho and Pascual. So Pancho really respected Madero's courage, and though he doubted if he was the right person to lead Mexico into a new age, he was now a loyalist. And we're not going to talk about it a whole bunch, in at least in terms of my script that I wrote, but it's important to remember that, like, if you think about even like gangs, whether it's gangsters from the 40s or modern gangs, loyalty, it's a big deal, man. Like, you don't betray your friends. And if you say, hey, I'm going to do a thing, it's like you betraying that person is a big deal. So Pancho was very much of that mindset. He was not a traitor. He did not go against his word. That was like a big thing for him. Okay. But now that Diaz was gone, Mexico was gearing up for its first true presidential election in decades. In Madero's mind, the revolution was over, and on October 1st, 1911, he was elected president with an astounding 98% of the vote.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane.
So that's why a few minutes ago when I was like, nah, I think the vast majority of Mexicans were in favor of Madero. This is the proof in the pudding, right? It was like,
that's crazy. Very
few people were like, no, let's get somebody else in power, right? So once in office, however, Madero didn't exactly align with the will of the people. He left many of Diaz's military officers in place, along with many of his other appointed politicians. Though he had good intentions, it seemed like Madero didn't really understand what the people of Mexico were fighting for. In his mind, it was all about fighting for democracy. But the people wanted real, actual change and to get back what was taken from them, like their land. In the south of Mexico, one such freedom fighter refused to stop fighting until he and his army had taken down the hacienda owners who had taken their land. That man was the infamous Emiliano Zapata.
Ooh.
Yeah, which you know that name, right?
Man. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and by the way, there is a city now in Mexico, I think it's just south of Mexico City, called Emiliano Zapata. That's how big of a deal Zapata is in Mexico. There are statues of him in like Juarez. There's a statue of him there. It is a little bit controversial. It's almost akin, not quite, but similar to how a lot of people feel about like Southern generals that still have statues from the Civil War. It's not quite the same thing, but there are the modern times people that are like, they're
maybe like
really...
a Che Guevara sort of character where it's like, certain people from certain political leanings might like him, but from others, they're like, that guy is brutal and terrible.
And a monster. Perfect comparison. Way better comparison than Southern generals, because it wasn't the same, but it's contentious, let's say. But again, like Che. So much to the shock and dismay of the people, Madero sent federal troops to stop Zapata. Big mistake. The hunt for Zapata was brutal. The federal armies burned villages to the ground, raped the women before doing so, executed crowds of captured revolutionary fighters, and terrorized everyone in the region, regardless of their association with Zapata. Eventually, Madero called off the brutal offensive and the region of Morelos was pacified, but Zapata never forgot and would never forgive Madero for his treachery. As for Madero's new government, he just didn't trust his revolutionary compatriots to get the job done, so he ended up keeping or appointing people that had previously worked for Porfirio Diaz. Pancho had his doubts, but was among the very few people that still thought Madero was doing a good job and working towards a better Mexico.
I mean, just thinking about it from a political perspective, there is no one really in history that manages to, as we would say today in today's politics, clear the swamp, right? Without severe consequences to the people, right? Say what you will about it, but I remember like Obama talking about like making a public health care here in the United States, right? That was a very mixed bag, even amongst the people who supported it, about how effective it was, because face it or not, he had to wrestle with the actual insurance companies and the actual policy holders in order to get his idea passed. And then by the end of it, the argument was, is it really the same plan that we started out with? Because now we've had to, and in the same way with Madero, like maybe he wanted to completely clear out the current system, but there are certain people who are in control of the haciendas, like you said, of like, the rancheros and all these different people. And he can't just wipe them off the face of the planet, not without causing severe social unrest. So he has to kind of work with these people. But by doing that, then the people who originally supported him think that he's only taking half measures. But does he have a choice? That's
100%. And speaking to that, Madero had an impossible task. He was trying to implement massive reform without disrupting the social, economic, or political landscape of his country.
Oh, so Yeah.
Madero hated the dictatorship, but had to admit that the economy Porfirio Diaz had created was incredibly strong. He believed that democracy would fix the problems Porfirio Diaz had created over time, but the people wanted radical change, and they wanted it now. For Pancho, however, none of this really mattered. He had no delusions of grandeur about becoming a political leader, and for him, he felt like the job had been done. Diaz's cronies were gone, and he could now go about making an honest living. That being said, Pancho knew the sacrifices his soldiers and their families had made, many of whom were now injured, which made them less effective in being able to support their families. He told this to Madero, asking him to provide some kind of compensation to them, but Madero was seemingly more concerned with the economy than his own people. Pancho was extremely loyal to Madero, but even more loyal to the idea that revolutionary fighters should be taken care of by the new government, continuously suggesting that veterans of the revolution should get a pension. Madero did nothing.
Oh.
Eventually, Pancho took matters into his own hands and began attacking and raiding haciendas who had not supported the revolution. He stole their cattle, horses, money, and anything else of value, giving the profits to the soldiers who had fought for him.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you have to. Like, how are you going to not financially? I mean, I guess we see this today with veterans here in the U.S., right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a lot of times where these people are used in order to bring political security and bring all these different things, and then once they're used, it's sort of like, I understand Madero's thing where it's like if he starts paying off the bandits, then the federales, which he has to keep in place, would start getting pissed off. But also, how are you going to bite the hand that literally fed you into this position?
Exactly. And so it was a tough situation, but again, it was like he.
But it's cool that Pancho just like kind of took it into his own hands. He's like, okay, fine, you won't pay them, I will. You give me everything you own.
Yeah, and this is where like, I think the bandit in Pancho never died, right? Where like this situation arose where he was like, oh, you're not going to pay these soldiers? I'll tell you what I'm going to do then. And was like, back to being a bandit, stealing all your stuff, selling it all. And then fine, here you guys go. You need something? I'm just going to take it from these people who abused you for years. So like, that is really cool. Like, that's why I say Pancho is a very complicated figure, that it's like, he was no saint, but he did really cool stuff. Like, it's this very like, the scales of justice sort of balance in his own weird mind, Yes. So again, this is one of those funny series that we're doing where it's like, I'm not trying to necessarily fully celebrate this guy. I want to bring about, the bad things that he did, but that's also to be like, but it can't negate there was also this sort of heroic thing about him that was very cool. So I don't know. It's a tough one, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's always how it is with as Den calling the quote greats of history.
Right. The great men, quote unquote, of history. Now, when he started doing this, Madero tried to stop Pancho by tapping on the shoulder of the newly appointed governor of Chihuahua, Abraham Gonzalez, who we mentioned before. But unfortunately for Madero, Abraham Gonzalez was the very man who had previously tapped on Pancho's shoulder to join the revolution. And furthermore, Gonzalez actually agreed with what Pancho was doing. So in order to regain control, Madero ordered Gonzalez to become a member of his cabinet in Mexico City, and therefore forfeit the governorship. This left the state of Chihuahua wide open for the old cronies of Porfirio Diaz to step back into power. Furthermore, many of the revolutionaries were pissed that Madero forced their beloved governor and fellow revolutionary to resign his post. Before he knew it, Madero was facing a rebellion from the very rebels he had organized to overthrow the government, led by Pascual Orozco, the very man who, alongside Pancho Villa, helped him take the border city of Juarez.
Ooh. It's just like all coming together where it's like every time you move a block, something shifts into its place. You know, I'm not sure if I don't think you've read this, but Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series plays a lot. Okay, yeah. Plays a lot into this where it's like, you know, the revolutionaries and then the next series afterwards takes part in the old. And he has to have read something about Pancho Villa because basically the same thing happens where it's like, well, the government is better for sure, but still the rich people are the ones in power and the poor people are the ones who aren't in power.
Right.
So we still need to dismantle that one too. We've gotten rid of the dictator, but we haven't gotten rid of the rich people. So we need to dismantle that too. But then that causes severe social unrest and that causes intense, you know, distraught. And wow.
I told you from the beginning, this is like an episode of Game of Thrones where it's like,
it really
this person does this, but then this happens and that's a good thing, but then they don't do the thing they want. So this person and the sort of like Shakespearean irony of it, right? The very rebels who you took up to fight against the dictator are now rebelling against you because they don't like the policies that you're enforcing, right?
Yeah.
It's this crazy back and forth kind of a thing. So I just think it's amazing.
And I can't even necessarily call Madero a bad guy.
No, not at all.
And I can't call the bandits wrong for doing what they're doing either.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's a sticky situation, man. It's complicated.
And it's like, you can't convince the bandits to not do this because, you know, Madero's perspective is just like, if you guys could just sit tight for 5 minutes. He's like, with what? What can we sit tight with?
Right.
We have no house. We have no food. We can't have our own cattle that used to be ours and free to rustle as we pleased. Like, how are we supposed to sit tight while you come up with your grand plan for Mexico when we have literally nothing? I'm going to take this now. Sorry. And then Madero's like, well, I can't let you take this because this is ruining my plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dude.
I'm at the edge of my seat with this one. So.
Now, in fact, in terms of these rebels here, Juarez was the rebellion's first target, and it was now under their control. So again, the rebels helped Madero take Juarez, and then they took Juarez back from Madero. It's like wild stuff, man. It's totally crazy. Now, much like Pancho, their goals were to give more land and rights back to the people, something they felt Madero was failing to do. Fighting broke out across the state once more, this time against federal troops dispatched by Madero himself.
Oh my gosh, he's become the very thing he wished to destroy.
Oh, to quote Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Crazy, right?
And I just mentioned Two-Face just earlier, so that's fine.
Now, things got so bad that on one occasion, a train was loaded with dynamite and set on a collision course with another oncoming train filled with federal troops.
That's terrifying.
Carnage ensued. Madero was in trouble, and by early 1912, the Orozco Rebellion, as history would come to know it, had taken over the state of Chihuahua. So what did Pancho think about all this? Well, Pancho was loyal to Madero, but was growing suspicious, as Orozco's men never looted the haciendas of the old guard loyal to Porfirio Diaz. He sensed treachery, but lacked proof, knowing Orozco resented Madero for appointing Abraham Gonzalez as governor of Chihuahua instead of him. So to stop Orozco, Pancho gathered 60 men to intercept his army in Parral. So essentially what was happening here was Orozco was... What's up?
Oh, just he thought that there was like infighting within his own group and that there was like somewhat like loyalist factions within his own people?
So basically what happened was Pancho was like, oh, Orozco, you're staging this rebellion all at the expense of the people. How are you paying for this? Oh, you're not raiding the haciendas of the landowners who were loyal to Porfirio Diaz. So I think, Orozco, you're now in cahoots with the very people we were trying to overthrow to begin with. Oh. Okay. So he was like, hang on, like, you're not right either, Orozco. Like, you're literally going with these people that have been making our lives hell for 15 years now, right? As long as we can remember. They're the old guard with Porfirio Diaz, right?
Yeah.
So essentially what happens here is Pancho catches word that Orozco is headed to this town called Torreon. And he was kind of looking for financial backing because Torreon was a rich city and he was figuring he could go to Torreon and get money from these rich people. And Pancho was like, well, the federal army needs time basically here to gather and actually get over to Torreon, Madero's people. Mm-hmm. So if I can stall Pascual, I think it's actually how you pronounce it, Orozco, if I can stall him for a couple of days and make it so that he can't get to Torreon as fast, I can actually help the Federals organize there faster and therefore help Madero. Okay.
Gotcha. So is Pancho still pretty pro Madero?
Yes.
Interesting.
It's hard to say pro, but loyal. Key thing, okay, is that he's like, I don't know that you're right, but you're right enough that I think that these other people are wrong. And I think more than anything else, Pancho was like, I hate Porfirio Diaz. I hate the hacienda owners who aligned with him. So if I'm at the very least with the guy who is against them, that's enough for me, at least for now.
Is Madero cool? Oh gosh, there's so much. Is Madero? Wow, I'm like losing it. Is Madero cool with Pancho after raiding the haciendas, or is he just like?
So at this, to my knowledge, Pancho just did this.
Oh yeah,
he was just
the two
like,
of them weren't necessarily in cahoots. He was just like, this guy seems like an asshole, and that guy seems like slightly less of an asshole.
Right.
So I'm just gonna do my own thing.
Right.
Cool.
And he was like, I think I'm just gonna help out Madero, kind of a thing. Okay. So again, he gathered 60 men to intercept Orozco's army in Parral. So despite being outnumbered 1,000 to 60, Pancho's forces held off Orozco's rebellion for several days, buying enough time for the federal army to prepare for battle in Torreon, where again, Orozco was trying to find out some financial backing. So thanks to Pancho, Madero was safe for now. Now, Madero was grateful, even making Pancho an honorary general in the federal army, and Pancho was thrilled. He wanted to learn more about military tactics and processes. But remember, most of the officers in the federal army had come from the time of Porfirio Diaz, and they saw Pancho as nothing more than a criminal and bandit, and maybe rightfully so. The main man in charge, General Victoriano Huerta, particularly hated Pancho and started accusing him of nonsense like horse thievery, and Pancho just wasn't having it. So he told Huerta he was leaving the federal army and returning to the Revolutionary Army. Now, this was legal according to Madero's laws.
That's wild.
But illegal according to military law, as it constituted desertion. So on June 3rd, 1912, General Huerta had Pancho arrested, thrown into jail, and scheduled for immediate execution. And when I say immediate, I mean it. That same day, Pancho was lined up in front of a firing squad, and as the hammers of the guns were cocked back, Pancho broke down in tears, falling to his knees and pleading with the commanding officer that he be allowed to send a telegram to Madero. The commanding officer saw the injustice that was about to be committed. He took pity on Pancho and allowed him to send his telegram. When Madero got word of what was happening, he called off the execution and had Pancho sent to Mexico City. But General Huerta was determined, and during Pancho's trip to Mexico City, Huerta's men tried 2 different times to assassinate him, but they were never successful. Upon arriving in Mexico City, Huerta had Pancho court-martialed, and once again, Pancho received the death sentence. But he was saved once again by Madero, who altered his sentence to imprisonment.
This guy has cheated death. So, like, the fact that he has been sent twice to be executed and managed to get out of it. One of the times when someone was literally pointing the gun at his face about to kill him.
Oh, I know.
Like, immediately.
It's insane. Like, it really is one of those weird ones where the amount of
Humans
times
are
Pancho
so
Villa
weird.
should have died is like, the fact that he didn't is like, how did you do this? Like,
Humans are so weird. I was just talking about this with Shalena, right? Because Shalena is in roller derby and it's a very aggressive sport. It's like, you know, you can have a guy like Pancho escape death dozens of times, but then some lady that you've heard of, you know, in your neighborhood trips on a sidewalk and then she hits her head and then she's dead instantly.
Yep.
It's like, how does that happen? Just the odds of it are so insane that some people just, they almost seem like they can't die. It's kind of like when they were like trying to assassinate Hitler in World War II, right? I mean, what was it, like 150 assassination attempts on Hitler during the course of World War II?
Oh, I know.
And a lot of the times they should have gone through because for instance, I'm not sure if you know this, this is just spouting tons of military history that has been in the deep, dusty recesses of my mind now that we're talking about somebody like Pancho. But like one of the reasons why they never assassinated the general of the Luftwaffe was because he was bad at his job, and they knew that if they kept him in Hitler's cabinet, they'd have an easier chance to kill him.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, the leader of the Luftwaffe was a pilot at some point, but had almost no tactical experience.
Oh, wow.
And they were like, if he gets replaced with somebody actually competent, we are in trouble. Because the only reason why he was in the position he was because he was a like #1 Hitler fan. You know, had posters of him in his room like it was.
Oh, Hitler, I love you so much.
He sings all of his songs, you know.
Oh my gosh.
So they would like keep him around because they're like, well, that guy's an idiot, which means that we can get to him easier, which means that it'll be easier to assassinate Hitler if we ever need to do that. But once again, he escapes death in the same way that Pancho, like, he killed a dude with a comal when he was like 16. They were like trained bandits, trained military professionals.
Yep. And he was like, later.
Gosh,
I know.
That's crazy.
He's slippery like a snake, man.
He really is.
So, from June 4th to December 24th, 1912, Pancho remained in prison. He was convinced his old pal, Francisco Madero, who is now president, would pardon him. Madero had even pardoned a good amount of federal officers who had attempted a coup against him, so Pancho figured he'd be safe, but he was wrong. He remained in prison for 7 long months. Despite many a letter sent to Madero pleading for mercy, Pancho started to think that escaping from the prison would be his only way out. At the same time, some rich oligarchs who wanted to see Madero overthrown started to get in contact with Pancho. In their minds, if they could convince Pancho that Madero was a traitor, they could help him escape, and once free, Pancho could start up a rebellion. He wasn't fully committed just yet, but was willing to take the oligarchs' plan for escape. The plan was relatively simple. During one of Pancho's meetings with his lawyers, Pancho was given a hacksaw and a business suit. On Christmas Eve, 1912, Pancho started to cut through the bars of his jail cell with a hacksaw. Once that job was done, he put on the business suit normally worn by a lawyer, slipped through the bars, and just walked out. All the guards assumed he was a lawyer. Now,
That's wild.
Isn't that amazing? Now, once outside, a car was waiting for him, provided by the lawyers. The car took him...
forgetting that it's set in this time where there's business suits and lawyers, but go ahead.
Oh, I know, right? The car took him all the way to the Pacific coast, where he hopped on a boat, sailed to the U.S. border, and finally made his way to El Paso, Texas, to live in exile. When he arrived, he sent a letter to his old pal, Abraham Gonzalez, saying, quote, "Don Abraham, I am safe and sound in El Paso. Here I am at your orders. I am the same Pancho Villa you have known in times past, suffering from misfortune, but with no bad thoughts." From his apartment, he could see Ciudad Juarez, the very city he had helped Madero take just a year and a half earlier.
That's a wild year.
Pancho was confused and dismayed. He had been a loyal supporter of Madero, had fought for him during the first portion of the revolution, helped him secure a key victory, helped save him from Pascual Orozco's rebellion, and was now a convicted criminal living in exile. Unfortunately for Francisco Madero, he had made one bad calculation too many and put his faith in the wrong people. Despite warnings from all his trusted revolutionary commanders, Madero kept many of the old guard loyal to Porfirio Diaz in power, and had even pardoned 2 generals named Bernardo Reyes and Felix Diaz, who had previously attempted coups to overthrow him. But since their pardons, Reyes and Diaz joined forces and started to form a new plan to once again overthrow Madero. But none of Madero's old pals like Pancho Villa would be there to save him. The first phase of the Mexican Revolution was about to come to a swift, violent end with a devastating and bloody event that history would come to know as the 10 Tragic Days. And that's where we'll pick back up for part 3.
That's so cool.
Of Pancho Villa.
Dude. If you notice, like there's huge gaps in this episode where I just didn't talk because I was completely wrapped in whatever you had to say. It's exactly like you said. It's very Game of Thronesian in the fact that there are no evil characters. Everybody's a bad character, and everybody's, for the most part, trying to do good, except for maybe Porfirio and his gang.
And even that's complicated, because it's like most people will look at Porfirio Diaz and go like, were you a good guy? No. But did you turn Mexico 180 degrees into a place where you were prosperous as a nation? Yeah. So like
prosperous as a nation, but not prosperous as a people.
Correct. But so that's where it gets delicate and complicated, right? So, and that's very fair. But you also look at things like the United States around this time, where we hadn't even figured out the 8-hour workday. America was abusing their people too, and we still celebrate the presidents
countries around the world
time.
Where they're prosperous as a people and not prosperous as a nation, like lots of like Northern European countries. And I kind of see that as more beneficial in a lot of ways.
No, I agree. I'm
Maybe
just
not more
saying,
contributing to the general welfare of all of humanity. I don't think we, like, you know, some of these Nordic countries aren't making items and doing things that are deathly essential to the survival of humanity, but they are a happy population, which is like kind of all you can ask for.
And all I'm saying is, though, is that with a guy like Porfirio Diaz, though I'm not a fan, right? I would say he is still one of those weird gray characters where I don't think...
he was a contributor, yeah. Like, industry didn't exist previous to Porfirio, at least I think not in the capacity.
Right, I think to a weird extent, he did love Mexico, right? But he just was more greedy than anything else. And so it kind of turned into this thing of him being like, well, if we can make the nation prosper, the people can figure it out. It's fine. So he definitely did do bad things. I mean, he took away education from the people of Mexico. That's bad enough as it is. But like, again, I think people that look at him objectively...
that was arcing towards what he believed was an overall good.
Right. I think objectively people were going... You're a generally bad guy who maybe actually did a lot of great things economically speaking. So it's again one of those weird, like, I don't know. I don't even know how to tip that scale. It's like I would generally say I'm not in favor of him at all, but like it is undeniable. And even Madero had to admit, he was like, man, if I just change everything, our economy will collapse. Like, so like the systems that you built, we have to figure out this delicate balance of how do we keep it going without devastating the economy, but the people want their rights and their land, but I can't really do that because the hacienda owners are creating these jobs that are like, so it's this weird, like political just cluster, right? Where like, how do you navigate through this freaking swamp, right? And so again, to reiterate it, I think Madero had this impossible task when he became president, where it was like there was nobody. If he made the revolutionaries happy,
I mean, the
federales
he walked
would hate
into
him.
a mess.
Yes,
he walked into a mess. I remember I read Serge Tankian's book.
From
Down with the System.
Yep,
and he talks about what's happening in like Armenia and all of that. And it's sort of a very similar situation happened where there was an extremely grassroots revolution. In fact, the largest nonviolent revolution possible. They came up with this idea of dispersed, dispersed protesting, where basically protesters would go and block a highway until cops showed up. And then the second they showed up, they just find another highway where the cops weren't and then go block that. And then when they showed up, they just hop and hop and hop and hop.
Oh, interesting.
And they only needed a very small population in order to basically halt the economy in Armenia to cause this very grassroots guy to come into power. But once he did, Serge talks about how his assistants were all speaking Russian on the phone, basically saying whatever he was saying to some other question mark person on the line.
Interesting.
And it's like, we got him here, but here is still loaded with bad people. We got, he's in office, but the office is being bugged and mic'd and recorded. And the same thing is kind of happening with Madero, where he kind of was maybe not forced, but definitely railroaded into a position where he ended up being against the very people who put him in power.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. This has been
it's so much messier than anybody wants to give it credit for.
I know.
It's never a simple answer. And like whatever your political leanings are, that's just like the fact of the matter. It is never a simple answer.
Totally.
No one's going to fix it for you. Even if you get the right person, they're going to be in the wrong place with the wrong people. And like, I think the Mexican Revolution is a huge point of that. Absolutely.
And it's been a total roller coaster for me. And like I said, episode 3 is the coolest so far.
I'm stoked.
We're going to get into some of my
favorite
battle
called
stuff.
Again?
Which one?
You said the next thing that's going to be happening.
Oh, it's called the 10 Tragic Days. Is what the people of Mexico
I'm also
call
excited to be like, how is America feeling about like all of these Mexican revolutionaries chilling in El Paso, which is now freshly American territory?
Well, I mean, you kind of have to remember that at this point, it was, I can't say that it was like lawless, but it's sort of like if you ever played Red Dead Redemption 2, I think Red Dead Redemption 2 takes place, I mean, maybe in like 1905, 1910, something, maybe even a little bit later, maybe even like
Tesla's
1918.
actually in Red Dead Redemption 2, his little remote controlled submarine, his little side quest. But anyway.
And so I think it's actually a weirdly good example in that you were like, how is the the American government cool with this? And it's like, well, because the land was still relatively lawless. And like, it wasn't like you walked over and said,
Yeah.
Right. Or like, hey, where's your passport? It was sort of like the borders, I think, were pretty open at that point. And there were certain jurisdictions that were between those borders. But like, I don't think it was necessarily illegal to just come over from Mexico to the United States. I don't think they had really figured that out yet, Yeah. So again, I think it was, and I think you could hide relatively easily because there were so many people from Mexico that lived in the United States.
I mean, he literally went out of his own prison and people couldn't identify him.
Exactly.
But it's also like a thing that we keep forgetting about is like with modern technology and modern organization, like if you were a French person in anywhere in France, there is a 99% chance that if Napoleon decided to say hi to you on the street or whatnot, you would not know who he is. Because not only did you not know what he looked like, but you'd never even seen a painting of him because paintings were rare and expensive and not things that were commonly being passed out. You might have seen an illustration, but that's an illustration of like a kind of short, mostly balding guy, which a lot of people are kind of short and mostly balding.
Yeah.
So somebody like Pancho Villa, it's like, he has a big mustache and a sombrero, just like all of the other vaqueros that are working in El Paso right now.
I mean,
like what? How are you going to identify him?
Yeah,
that's interesting. Wow, I'm just so stoked about this.
Yeah, it's been a ton of fun, and hopefully everybody out there is enjoying this as well. It's been a blast for me so far, and it's been very eye-opening. It's taught me about a portion of history that I just really, truly had no idea about.
I had no idea about.
Really. So it's been
the recency of it too.
I know. It'd be basically 100 years ago is when this happened, just over at this point, which is pretty wild to think about. That, again, we're like on the eve of World War I. We're 10 years shy of the 1920s and the flappers and jazz and all that kind of stuff. That's when this was all happening.
It's nuts.
Pretty crazy stuff. So anyhow, suppose we'll wrap it up there. I think we've probably gone long enough. But like always, everybody, if you're wanting to support our show and you like what we do, we'd love that support. It's going to be on our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers. You can also find us on places like social media. We're going to be on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, places like that, generally at The Biographers. Let me think. Oh, yeah. I was forgetting to say this. Any questions, comments, corrections? Obviously, send us a quick email. That's going to be at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. And I think that's mostly it. Oh, always give a shout out to your website, of course. Anybody interested in metalworking or knife needs? I know you're starting to get swamped these days, but if anybody does want to ask Akiva for a knife, you can buy one from him. You're going to go to metalworkbymeola, meola.com. You can use the code biographers at checkout, get 10% off of your order. Anything else you want to shout out?
That's a good point. Yeah, exactly. So with Metalwork by Meola, I actually, for the first time in lots of episodes, will have new knives on the website. I'm doing a Colorado Knife Makers show here in Denver this weekend. If you've listened to this episode, you probably missed it because it's coming out on... Well, actually, it's coming out on Friday, so it will be on Saturday at Element Knife Company here in Denver. We're going to have 4 or 5 Colorado knife makers who are not only personal acquaintances of mine, but some of the best knife makers in the state. We're going to have Jaden Szyminski, a journeyman smith and also fire juggler at my wedding. We're going to have Dustin North, an ex-airman who makes some incredible EDC knives. We're going to have Andy Stravers, who is a student of Jaden's, as well as Elijah Durso Sabina, who is another Jewish knife maker that I met through Jaden as well. He has a whole host of students who are now running their own businesses. And
Sweet.
We're all going to be at Element Knife Company that weekend, which means if I don't blow up in my shop over the course of this week, then by Monday, once the show is over, whatever I have left is going to be on the website. I'll have some Damascus blades. I'll have some monosteel blades. I'll have chef knives, petty knives, K-tips, utility knives, a bunch of other stuff. I will probably send out a newsletter about all of it. Some fancy stuff, some medium stuff, some cheap stuff. We're going to have it all.
Cool.
So,
Sweet.
yeah,
Well,
first time in a while.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm excited for you, too. So again, I guess we'll wrap it up there. Thanks again, everybody, so much for listening. And do remember, like always, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge. And I do hope you all learned something today.
See ya.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.